This is part 5 in our post-World War II theological landscape. In this one I want to look at the whole movement of Renovare and Ressourcement. There has come to be, largely from the classical tradition, Christian tradition, and from the postmodern tradition, a critique of what they call modern Christianity. And that critique of modern Christianity critiques, on the one hand, liberalism and the way it's just assimilated into the cause du jour liberalism of our time, but also it comes as a critique of the Calvinist tradition, the rational confessionalism, theories of the atonement, attachment to Republican politics. And so there's been this turn to what we call the Great Tradition. Evangelicals, Catholics, Orthodox together. And that's taken two directions. One is the Renovare movement, Richard Foster, Dallas Willard, people like this. Their argument is that within the great tradition there is a variety of traditions. And so depending on where a person came into Christianity or the form of Christianity they grew up in, they probably have a very limited understanding. And so the Renovare movement is an attempt to expose people, open them up to all the wide, rich, full literature of Christendom, both East and West. And the hope is that the soul, in its quest for a much greater understanding of faith, will be nourished by these important texts. And so the Renovare movement has grown, it's expanded in the last couple of decades. It's meant a lot to people who are trying to get out of the cave and the shadow world of usually a fairly narrow understanding of faith. Without just leaving or jettisoning the faith behind. And so Renovare has played a significant role in terms of exposing people to the post-apostolic, the patristic, the mystical, the contemplative, the charismatic, and many other forms of Christianity, and by publishing all sorts of works, by putting on workshops. Now, the danger of the Renovare movement, its appeal, obviously, it opens up people to the sheer breadth, the vistas of Christendom, that most people just do not have access to. And that's its appeal, that's its strength, that's its draw. The danger of the Renovare movement, it goes cherry picking, and so it selectively takes texts with often not diving deeper into the complexity of those texts and the fullness of those texts. And so there's a bit of dilettantism or voyeurism in the Renovare movement, but at least it's trying to break out of the confines of the modern understanding of Christianity, and that's its strength, that's its glory, and it should be acknowledged for that contribution it's made to the ongoing opening up of Christianity to new possibilities. The other is the Ressourcement movement, in which these are more sophisticated and thoughtful people actually going back to the great classics of Christendom, whether of the East, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nazianzen, John Chrysostom, Basil, Theodore Mopsiesta, the Western Fathers, Jerome, Augustine, Ambrose, Benedict, many of these great fathers and mothers, I might add, of the church, the whole desert tradition, which is a part of that, and they really get into an in-depth understanding of these texts. They're getting back into the original languages, looking at what the mothers and fathers of the church, how they understood mystical, contemplative thought, what's the relationship between the contemplative journey and the nuances of that, and the soul and transformation, and that in the sacramental, liturgical life of the church, and then what's the relationship of spirituality, the church, into a prophetic witness in the world. And so the Ressourcement movement is a turn in a much more substantive and significant way by some leading thinkers to get back to the sources and their relevance for today, not just as sort of museum pieces or archival work, but a shuttling back and forth between the wisdom of the past, not just as knowledge or as information, but the insights of the past and what they speak to us today, and then the relationship of that to our life in the church and the world. And so these two movements, which come as a critique of the modern understanding of Christianity, to some degree from the postmodern, also from the classical, both need to be heeded and hearded, but I would argue the Ressourcement tradition goes much deeper than the Renovare, and it's far more substantive. And you'll find this going on in the Anglican tradition, the Roman Catholic, the Orthodox tradition, the convergence of these, and many people who are dissatisfied with various forms of Protestant Christianity, and also coming to the end, I might add, of postmodern forms of Christianity.